leadership and extended presidential terms. A quiet but powerful transformation is underway across Africa. Voters are increasingly rejecting long-standing incumbents and embracing change at the ballot box. From Malawi and Seychelles to Madagascar, the political trajectory on the continent is shifting, raising a compelling question: is Africa entering a new era of democratic accountability? This piece was produced by Alvin Githinji.
Africa's political landscape, once dominated by long-serving leaders and entrenched incumbents, the continent is now witnessing a wave of electoral upsets, one-term presidency and a growing appetite for change. From the island nations of Madagascar and Seychelles to the heartland of Malawi, voters are sending a clear message: performance matters and power is no longer guaranteed. For decades, African politics were defined by leaders who held office for extended periods, often through constitutional amendments, electoral manipulations, or sheer political dominance. But the recent elections have upheld this narrative, and the concept of a one-term presidency is gaining traction across Africa.
Across Africa, the phenomenon, and not only Africa but world over, the phenomenon of presidents only serving one term largely arises because these presidents are leading populations that are, number one, highly educated, very diverse, and to an extent very demanding. Demanding in the sense that they know their rights, they know what they want in terms of good leadership. So they are holding most presidents in Africa and world over to a very high standard. So if a president appears not to perform or not to deliver on what the citizens feel are their present concerns, then they move on to the next person. And I think it's a phenomenon that has crept in and will continue occurring not only in Africa, but in many parts of the world.
In Malawi, the 2025 general election marked a dramatic reversal of fortunes. Lazarus Chakwera, elected in 2020 after a historic court-ordered rerun, was defeated by incumbent Peter Mutharika of Democratic Progressive Party, DPP. Mutharika secured 56.76% of the vote, while Chakwera garnered just 33.01%. The election, driven by economic hardship and public dissatisfaction, highlighted the electorate willingness to hold leaders accountable, even those who once symbolized reforms. Chakwera's administration faced criticism for economic mismanagement and inflation, issues that resonated deeply with a population grappling with a high cost of living and high food prices. Former President Lazarus Chakwera conceded defeat in the 2025 general election after his one term, joining a growing list of leaders who have respected the will of the people and stepped aside.
2 nights ago, the Malawi Electoral Commission announced the validated results of the presidential election from 11 councils, bringing the total to 24, with only the results of 12 councils remaining. From those official results, it was clear that my main rival, His Excellency Professor Arthur Peter Mutharika of the Democratic Progressive Party, had already secured an insurmountable lead and is the presumptive winner of the presidential election.
In Seychelles, former President Wavel Ramkalawan, who had ended decades of one-party dominance in 2020, faced a tough re-election battle in 2025.
You won a majority in the National Assembly.
His administration, once hailed for ushering in democracy change, struggled with economic challenges and raising public disconnect. Wavel Ramkalawan thus lost the elections in 2025 to opposition candidate Patrick Hamini. Despite having unseated long-term incumbent just 5 years earlier, Hamini defeated Wavel Ramkalawan, who had served just one term. Ramkalawan's 2020 victory was widely welcomed as a new beginning, as he had finally toppled the United Seychelles Party, which under different names had governed since seizing power in 1977 coup. Ramkalawan came in as a reformer and promised all sorts of changes. He focused on increasing social protection and recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic, which damaged the country's main revenue earner. tourism. Yet 5 years later, the people decided he hadn't delivered and voted him out by a margin of 52.7% to 47.3% in a runoff.
People lose elections and they get out. And that's very nice as a democratic characteristic. The problem would be if losers refuse to lose. And we know some places people refuse to lose, and they should get into power by creating problems. But the positive aspect of it is that somebody who is sitting in office loses and agrees he has lost and get out. That's a very good thing.
Madagascar has also seen its share of political upheaval. The country's history of contested elections and leadership turnover continued in 2025 when President Andry Rajoelina faced mounting pressure over his ruling of the government. Andry Rajoelina was a man of the people who first came to prominence in 2009 as the mayor of Antananarivo when he led protests against the government that resulted in a military-backed-up coup and the ouster of President Marc Ravalomanana 16 years ago. The uprising resulted in a military-backed-up coup that brought Rajoelina to power as the transitional leaders of the Indian Ocean country at the age of just 34. This year, Gen Z-led protest erupted over chronic water and electricity outage. It escalated into larger dissatisfaction with Rajoelina, alleged government corruption and poverty, which affected about 75% of the country, of roughly 30 million people. The protest brought thousands onto the streets in several cities and initially sparked a harsh crackdown by security forces that reportedly left 22 people dead and more than 100 injured. But a key moment came while soldiers accompanied protesters to Main Square in the capital and demanded that Rajoelina steps down. The same military unit that aided Rajoelina's rise seized power from the civilian government led by Colonel Michael Randrianirina announced a military takeover. This bringing to an end Rajoelina's tenure and paving the way for Randrianirina, who was sworn in as president of Madagascar.
Madagascar's Rajoelina came into power on a very populist, very popular mandate. But after some time in office, people feel he is not meeting what they're looking for. So increasingly, the trend is going to become you come into power and very quickly your security is deliver on what you promised. Give the people what they want, within reasonable doubt, of course. And then that secures you a second term and hopefully you move forward. And so increasingly we're going to have this phenomenon of presidents not feeling secure. And they will hit the ground running from their first term to try and deliver. Otherwise, they will be kicked out by a very demanding population.
This trend suggests that African voters are no longer swayed by incumbency alone. Performance, integrity, and responsiveness now matter more than ever.
The ability of people to think critically. And when they think critically, they raise a lot of questions. So if those people in government are not performing, you have new generations of people who are not as docile as their parents or grandparents. So when they see something going wrong, they've learned how to demand answers.
According to experts, key drivers of this democratic wave included growing civil awareness, improved electoral transparency, and the rise of youth-led movements demanding accountability.
One of the things possibly you can celebrate on the continent is the consciousness within the electorate. I think the hero of Africa, the hero or the heroes of African democracy are the African peoples themselves. They have been very clear. Whether they are under a repressive regime or they are under a democratic regime, they have been receptive. And they're judging the situation for themselves. They are the ones who are responsible for changes like the one you see in Malawi. They are the ones who are responsible for the changes you see in the Sahel. They are the ones responsible for the changes you are witnessing across the continent. But the African elite is basically the enemies of their countries. It's a very sad statement to put, but that is the truth. But they are facing a very hostile electorate.
Africa is the youngest continent on Earth, with over 60% of its population under the age of 25. This demographic is digitally connected, politically aware, and increasingly vocal. Social media has become a power tool for mobilization and accountability. Youth-led campaigns and movements in Africa are challenging traditional political structures and pushing for reform. The movements have galvanized youth participation and challenged traditional power structures. This digital awakening is reshaping how campaigns are run, how leaders are scrutinized, and how citizens engage with democracy.
The young people across the continent have stood up and agreed that they are going to be part of the change. This youth activism has even led to an unprecedented, very young presidents in power. We're talking about a 40-year-old in Senegal, 35, 36-year-old in Burkina Faso. Look at who's contesting in Uganda, Bobi Wine, late 30s, early 40s. So you're finding young people also entering into the political domain because they want to bring the change that they've been agitating for. So youth activism has played a huge role and will continue playing a huge role in African elections and elections global, world over.
Experts believe this trend could usher in more responsive and accountable model of African leadership, where leaders must now earn trust through performance, not patronage. However, they warn that if this trend accelerates without solid governance structures, the continent could face new challenges, including instability.
The risk of this kind of wave is anarchy. And allow me to go back into history. There was the French Revolution. The French citizens were tired of King Louis and his wife Marie Antoinette, so they kicked them out of power. But the problem of that revolution is they did not have a clear plan of what to do. So guess what? The revolution was taken over by some people called the Jacobins. And they instituted a 10-year reign of terror until people used to say, the Louis we kicked out, King Louis who we kicked out was better than the Jacobins because they came in, they did not have a clear agenda. Even the revolution in Russia, when it came in, it was very brutal. If we get these mini revolutions and these mass movements that create anarchy, you're asking for the military to take over. So the risk is the military will feel, instead of the country going down to the dogs, instead of us losing the country totally, let the militaries take over. So you're going to have successive coups all over the place. So revolutions are good if they bring about positive change. If revolutions are mismanaged, if revolutions do not have clear direction, they lead to anarchy and they invite the military to leave the barracks and come and take over power. And if we get our soldiers into, once they taste power, now getting them out of power is another story altogether.
Despite the gains, democracy in Africa remains uneven. Strongman leadership in countries such as Cameroon have raised concerns about democratic backsliding. President Paul Biya was re-elected in 2025 as Cameroon's president, sparking unrest and highlighting the presence of entrenched leadership. In the historic yet familiar outcome to Cameroonians, Biya, 92, is the world's oldest president, but secured an 8th term in office, extending his 43-year-old rule over the country. Biya took office in 1982 and has held a tight grip on power ever since. His re-election now allows him to govern until 2032, that could see him in office until he is nearly 100, bringing his tenure close to a half-century at the helm of the country's leadership, in a country where most young citizens weren't born when he first took office.
I would be more inclined to look at the reasons why our development is not taking off than basically whether we need one-term or two-term leaders, because term limit has never delivered on anything. Term limit is not part of the democratic doctrine. It's a safeguard against malevolent leaders who would come and waste our time. And within the 10 years, even if one leader is not delivering to us, we can kick them out. That's the origin of the one-term doctrine, mantra. in the country. So the one-termers are saying, enough is enough, you've not delivered. They're not saying that they don't like your nose. No, that's not what they are saying. They are saying you have not delivered on core expectations.
Tanzania's 2025 election crisis adds a sobering point to Africa's vote awakening, highlighting how entrenched power can still suppress democracy momentum. While the rise of the one-term presidency across Africa signals a growing appetite for accountability, Tanzania's recent elections underscores the fragility of this progress. On October 29, 2025, Tanzania went to the polls amid widespread unrest, internet shutdown, and the jailing of opposition leaders. President Samia Suluhu Hassan, largely unchallenged due to the disqualification of major rivals, secured re-election in what many observers have described being not a democratic election.
Kwa mujibu wa katiba ya Jamhuri ya Muungano wa Tanzania,
Mkuu ameshakula kiapo na sasa anasaini hati ya kiapo chake.
This stark contrast of the vote-driven transactions in other African nations reveal that electoral awakening is not uniform across the continent. While some countries are embracing reforms, others, like Tanzania, are witnessing a tightening authoritarian control where voter power is curtailed rather than celebrated.
Ndugu zangu wa Tanzania, ni vyema tutambue kwa uchaguzi mkuu wa viongozi wa serikali ni mchakato wa msimu mmoja tu ndani ya kipindi cha miaka 5. Muda mwingine wote maisha lazima yaendelee.
These contradictions highlighted the fragrant nature of democratic progress. While some nations are embracing the change, others remain mired in authoritarianism and political stagnation. The political shift in Madagascar, Seychelles, and Malawi are demonstrations of a broader continental trend. Voters are no longer passive participants. They are demanding transparency, performance, and respect for democratic principles. While challenges remain, the rise of one-term presidency and the fall of long-term incumbents suggest that Africa's political awakening is real and growing. The ballot box is becoming a power tool for change, and the message from the voters is clear: leadership must be earned, not guaranteed. The African electorate is becoming more discerning, more demanding, and more willing to hold leaders accountable.
More and more countries are going to have responsible leadership, as opposed to the irresponsible leadership that African countries are used to. And that will happen because more and more citizens are going to be holding their leaders accountable. You see, leaders are very selfish people. They want to keep people in ignorance and poverty, because when you are poor, you are easy to control. And when you are illiterate or you are not educated, you are even more easier to control, because firstly you'll be made poorer, and then you'll be depending on somebody else for knowledge, and you are not able to hold anybody accountable because you are ignorant.
I think I would say democracy is overrated. There are two important things that Africans need to focus on. Not necessarily ideological democracy or liberal democracy, as it is said in the West. One, of course, is the stability of the countries. And stability does not necessarily come because of democracy. It comes because people are consciously building institutions and culture of stability. Because with stability, particular long-term stability, you have guaranteed for development, you have guaranteed that investors will not come because there is stability. The second, of course, is the ownership and control of our natural resources in order to fuel development. In the final analysis, you agree with the Indian scholar and philosopher Amartya Sen, who says development is freedom. And if you don't bring development, then there is no freedom. What does that mean? it means that it is possible to have democracy as we have in Kenya and have no development. The hero of African democracy is the people, not the leadership.
This awakening is not just about elections. It is about a deeper shift in political culture. As the continent continues to evolve, one thing is clear: the age of unquestioned incumbency is fading, and the new chapter in Africa's democracy is being written, one term at a time.